coming. The majority of the things that you see on the tables are out of my personal collection. I've been collecting probably for about 25 years. Things come from garage sales, antique stores. I get them for my birthday and for Christmas. You just never know where you're going to find pictures of dead people. Unfortunately, I cannot take ownership of the items over here, which are the big things. Those are from artifacts from the collection here at the Historical Society, and I'll mention a little bit about those later. But again, thank you for coming. I always love to do my program. I'm lucky if I get to do it once a year, and I love it when I have a large crowd of people who are interested. If you have any questions, put your hand up. I will try to answer them for you. And we're going to go pretty quickly because I have a lot of really good stuff to show you and only now 52 minutes to do it. So the name of my program is At Rest, for an obvious reason. It's all about death. If anyone has an aversion to seeing pictures of dead people, you should probably leave now because you're going to see a lot of them, adults and children. Nothing gruesome or grotesque though. I'm just going to do like a 30-second introduction to death. You're welcome. Before Victorian times, that's really kind of the cutoff in my collection. Death was really something to be feared. It was all fire and brimstone, and people were going to hell. There was a lot of skulls and crossbones, and that's what you saw in headstones in cemeteries. We can thank Queen Victoria for the elaborate death rituals that came during her reign and lasted for a very long time afterwards, some of which we still have hung on to even this long. Her reign was 1837 to 1901, and it was with the death of her beloved Prince Albert in 1861 that a slew of new mourning rituals came about. What she wore, everything she did was published in magazines and newspapers, distributed around the world, and everyone in cities and rural areas wanted to emulate what she was doing. And she, I will point out, was in mourning for the rest of her life after Albert died, which is a lot longer than the etiquette books prescribed. With the Victorian era, death was now thought of more as a transition to a better life and a reunion with the people who had gone before you. It was really considered a good death as opposed to the fire and brimstone hellish death, where you would be paying for all of your misdeeds. This headstone is in Pine Grove Cemetery, and the symbolism on here is called the Gates of Heaven, and that was really at that point considered the entry to this better life. And I just have to put in a plug for this because this is an exhibit that Linda and I did over at the Yawkey House Museum many, many years ago. It was an exhibit on birth to death, and we had the pleasure of recreating a Victorian death scene in the Yawkey House parlor. This was at that time, a casket that was in my collection. Linda helped me upholster it. The backdrop that you see, the kind of butterscotch colored fabric, is a portable backdrop that would have been taken from home to home by a funeral director. We've got the fresh flowers and of course the woman who is wearing the widow's weeds, dressed in black for mourning. And with just about everything, it got turned into a business. You know, for all of time, families really took care of their dead. You probably were born in your home, were raised there, ended up dying there. Your family would have taken care of your body and probably buried you out back. It was something that certainly your family, if not a little bit further reaching, your community took care of. And it was really the furniture makers in cities who are the ones who started making the caskets and thus bringing them into the funeral business that we now know today. Helke Funeral Home, Charles Helke, this year they are celebrating their 140th anniversary of being in business. They arrived from Germany in 1871. Charles Helke, along with his father August, started the Helke Furniture Company. And since making caskets was an awful lot like making furniture, it was really an easy line of business to add to what they were already doing. This is an ad from the city directory, and you can see they manufactured all kinds of furniture. Undertaking was a specialty, and they also manufactured ice boxes, refrigerators, and all kinds of barroom fixtures. So really anything you could make out of wood was fair game for the furniture companies. This is on 4th Street, 319 4th Street, which is where the Fillmore was, downtown Mission Church, I think is there now. That's where Helke's was. In 1839, they moved to 413 Jefferson Street, which is, this is 3rd Street, but I just have this because you can see their advertisement up there. And this was the location of really what is considered Wausau's first funeral home as we know it today. Ritter and Deutsch started in 1884 as furniture and undertaking again. This building was constructed in 1927, and this was at 315 Jackson Street. In 1951, Bob Brainerd joined the company, and he later became an owner with several others, and it was renamed Brainerd, Gerlach, and McCunn Funeral Home, which some of you may be familiar with. And in 1962, they opened the location they have now at 522 Adams Street, which is Brainerd Funeral Home. This is Peterson, Eschen Peterson Funeral Home. This is not the Peterson Funeral Home that you know now. This was at 307 Jefferson Street, kind of a humorously staged shot. And one of their bill heads, you can see they dealt with furniture, carpets, lace curtains, and draperies, and were also undertakers and embalmers. And this is not local, but I was just like this one. P.F. Finnegan, furniture, caskets, coffins, picture frames, and spinning wheels. We will not be undersold. And this is a funeral home in a rural community. This is in Unity. And you can see this was also a combination of furniture store and undertaking establishment. And another generic one with a beautiful hearse out front with the glass sides. And this is a bill head from Furniture and Cabinet Makers or and New. And underneath that you can see it says undertaking promptly attended to. And this is a bill head for the coffin of Walter McAdoe. $85 in 1872.
We should bring that back.
These are some items that were loaned to us from Peterson Funeral Home. There's a wood cooling board. There's a cooling board up here also. This one I think is for Ritter and Deutsch. And that, you know, in the early years, they started making the caskets, the coffins, and they kind of slowly got into embalming and being the one that you called when you had a body to prepare. And that really is the evolution of going just from making the furniture to getting into the undertaking and the funeral homes. And of course, they needed to, before there were actually funeral homes that you went to, the undertaker went to your house when someone died. So you had to take everything with you. You would take the cooling board, which was used to prepare the body, to cool the body, so that you could embalm it right in the home and dress it and prepare it, put it into the casket. You would take, over here we have a portable organ. There is a portable kneeler, portable crucifixes. Everything that you needed had to be portable. If you didn't have a car, if it was or someplace rural, you might put all these things on the train and take them with you. So you really had to go with everything that you needed. So this is a cooling board and just some empty bottles that had originally held embalming fluid. And this is a selection of different preparations that the undertaker would need. There is some mortician's powder on the side, which says that it allays all disagreeable odors. There is a powerful deodorant and disinfectant and preservative. There are a number of lip and flesh tints that would have been used to try to make the body appear more realistic, because heaven forbid someone who was dead looked like they were dead. We had to try to make them look like they were still alive. And some beautifying tint, and my favorite, which is Master Plastic. That really was what I call the original Body Putty. It came with an instruction book that told you how to use that to fill gaping wounds or to replicate missing features. So there'd be a section on what to do if someone had a gunshot wound to the temple, and it would tell you how to trim the flesh, how to mix it up to the right consistency, pack it in, and then make it look as though nothing had happened. And of course, as with any industry, there are catalogs full of the goods that you need. This is an embalming catalog with some restorative unit that you could use for replicating missing or damaged body parts. You could purchase ambulance cots. In the early years, if you needed an ambulance, you called the funeral home. The ambulance at that point was really not intended to save the living. It was to transport the dead often. In the 1930s, my father, in a different state, my father worked for a funeral home and his job was to drive the ambulance, and he went around and picked up all the dead bodies. And you could, of course, purchase the various things that you needed to take to the house. The kneeler, the very ornate candles, the votive light on the side, and the illuminated crucifix, which I love because I did not realize when I bought this that I actually own the illuminated crucifix that's in that ad. That was very exciting for me. This is in my living room. You light him up and Jesus casts a very nice glow in the corner. You could buy any number of designs of caskets with some very beautiful interiors. You could buy burial garments, which a good funeral home would have, or a prepared funeral home would have. They would be split down the back for easily dressing the body, and you would use these if the family did not have suitable clothes to put on the body.
So would they get buried?
Yes. Yep.
And how much are they? Can you tell?
I don't think there's prices in here. This is not the page with the prices. But they would have, and funeral homes still have this, where you can buy a dress or a suit to put on the deceased. This is from a floral arrangement catalog from the 1930s. This is titled The Lavish Casket Setting, including several special designs. And if you had a chance to look at the pictures over here, you will see that this actually is what they were doing. The 30s is kind of on the back end of when they kept doing this hugely elaborate stuff. It went into maybe the early 40s. To do this kind of thing at a funeral now would just be thousands of dollars. And the catalog is on the table if anybody wants to look at it afterwards. This is one of my favorites from that catalog, design catalog. This is a full-size chair that would have been covered all around with flowers, and it's titled The Vacant Chair. That was a very common symbol, starting in Victorian times, symbolizing the person who was missing. Sometimes you will see a family picture where there's a vacant chair, and you're wondering what the heck why is there an empty chair in that picture? That's symbolizing the person who's not there anymore. But it just would be cost prohibitive to try to recreate something like this now. And this is a funeral procession in the Edgar area. In about the World War I era, you can see there's some soldiers behind a very lovely hearse. And this is the courthouse on the 400 block downtown. It's still there. Very elaborate funeral procession here also. You can see the hearse on the side here. I have no idea whose funeral this was. I'm guessing perhaps some county official or some locally famous person. And also with any business, you have to have little trinkets and giveaways, just like you do now when you go places. Mine and company from Wausau had little coin trays with a pretty girl on it, because we all know the pretty girl sells the headstones. Playing cards from Huckey Funeral Home and from the Anderson Brothers and Johnson Quarry, which is out in the town of Maine. They are the ones who quarry the beautiful ruby red granite that we see in the cemeteries around here. Any number of fans that have funeral home advertising on the back. Calendars, the funeral home calendar. I think a lot of churches, a lot of funeral homes still give these away at churches every year. This one's from 1933 from Helke's. And then we get into some of the memorial practices that were done. With Queen Victoria, she really was the start of the whole concept that when somebody died, you just perpetually mourned them, and you did things to show the rest of the world that you were mourning the person who you lost. And one of the things that you did to show that was to edge your letters and your handkerchiefs and some other things in black. Early etiquette books will prescribe the width that border has to be based on how far you are into your mourning. Typically, if you're a woman who lost your husband, you were expected to be in mourning for 2 full years. You would start out entirely in black. You could not wear jewelry other than your wedding ring. You couldn't wear anything shiny. If you had buttons or beading, it should be jet. Everything had to be kind of flat and black and blah. And as the months progressed, you could they called it lightening. You could lighten your mourning. So first you might be able to add some touches of gray or purple and a little bit of white. Maybe after the first year, after you've been 3/4 of the way through, you might be able to add some other things that perhaps were shinier. After you had mourned for 2 years and a day, you were considered to be out of mourning and you could go back to your regular clothes and your regular way of doing things. And of course, you were supposed to really have no social interaction during that time. And imagine the poor woman who probably has 6 or 8 kids, who for 2 years is not supposed to be going out to find a man to help her support her family. A lot of women kind of dated on the sly, and when their 2 years of mourning was over, they already had somebody lined up to marry them because they really could not afford to have no income coming to their family. Yes?
Did the men have to wear black for 2 years?
Well, I will get to that because this is the funniest thing to me. Men had to wear a black armband for 6 weeks. And then they had to go, and the point of this was that they could go find a wife who would raise their children.
Oh.
They didn't have time to sit around doing nothing. So the unfairness of it all. So same thing with the edging on your mourning stationery. It would start out to be about 1/4 inch thick, and then as your mourning lightened, that band would get smaller and smaller and smaller until you were out of mourning when you could totally ditch the things edged in black. And there are a number of examples of letters edged in black. Newspaper columns were edged in black. This is a funeral notice, some thank you cards that have black edging. The newspaper from when Roosevelt died, and then this is in the 40s, so this is even kind of late for that they have edged the columns in the newspaper with black. And there was also a booming business in memorial cards. These were about 5 by 7, same size as cabinet card photos. There are a number of them on the table. Linda, if you want to pass some out. Linda's going to pass some things around. Just feel free to look at them and pass them along. We're going to do them on both sides of the room so everybody can see. And these are very similar to what we call prayer cards at funerals. And now you kind of get the little single fold thing that will have the person's name, when they were born, when they died, where they're buried. Just a little bit more elaborate version of them. Companies that produced these cards would employ women in towns all across the country to submit the names of the families of recently deceased people. And these companies would then send a sample card to the family, letting them know that they were providing this card out of the goodness of their heart, and basically telling the people, if you care about the person who has died and you want to let everyone know, you'll give us 10 cents to pay for this card, and then you'll also buy more. So it was kind of a guilt thing to get people to buy them. Some of them are plain and just printed with the vital statistics of the person. Some of them will have photos on them of the person. I have a number of those. These were intended to be put into the kind of elaborate Victorian photo albums that just had one picture on each page. You would put a photo of the person when they were living on one side and then their memorial card on the other side. And that's just a close-up of Mary Denk. Gone but not forgotten. And this is a very nice one. This is for Harriet McEachran. This is from Wausau. She died in 1906. 46 years old. And these are a little bit later. These are from really starting in the 20s, going forward into the 30s, sometimes the 40s. These are more the size of the funeral cards that most of us have seen. Again, sometimes having a photo of the deceased. This is a sign that was distributed, I believe, by the American Legion during World War I to businesses around the country, so that if there was a soldier returning to your home who had been killed during the war, it was customary for all of the businesses to close down while that person's funeral was taking place. Yeah, American Legion. And it's really just to honor the soldier and what they had done. Another way that the deceased were memorialized was hair jewelry. And we've got a couple pieces here from the collection of the Historical Society. We're not going to pass them around because they're delicate, but afterwards you can come up and take a look at them. This is a page out of a Godey's lady's book from, I think, the late 1850s. And what hair jewelry was, it could be used to memorialize not just the dead, but the living. All hair jewelry is not from the head of a dead person. But you would take the hair from a loved one. Most women were not talented enough or patient enough to be able to weave this, and you would send it into a company, tell them what design you wanted, and they would return the hair made into a piece of jewelry. Sometimes they were made into insets for rings, watch fobs, bracelets, pendants, just about any kind of jewelry could be fashioned from human hair. But it was, if you had the money, and if you were talented enough, if you wanted to do it yourself, you could take hair from the deceased and make a piece of mourning jewelry. These are some examples of actual mourning jewelry that I do not own. It's just wildly, wildly expensive. I could never hope to own a piece of this. You can see there's the brooch at the bottom that just has a lock of hair in it, and some ear fobs, earrings, and a ring that are made with hair. And this is a little piece of artwork that's made on the inside of the lid of a cigar box. And it's a memorial to someone, don't know who, but all of these dark areas that you see, these are all human hair. The tree is made from hair, the spade, and these are all classical death symbols of the urn, the anchor, the headstone, the spade, and the weeping willow tree. These were common to make. There was a lot of death. Unfortunately, if you were, a family that had 10 children, it probably was not unrealistic to expect that maybe 5, maybe 6 of them would die, depending on which epidemics they were trying to live through. And some of my favorites here, these are casket plates. There's a number of examples of them on the table. This is my title slide, At Rest. Casket plates were very similar to what you see in the lids of caskets now, where there might be a crucifix, and they remove that and give it to the family before they close the casket. Casket plates used to be in the place where the center of the fabric and the lid of the casket came together. There often would be a casket plate. It might say At Rest. This one is very elaborate. The gentleman died in 1908. It's engraved with his name and his vital statistics. The one on the top says Our Darling, and it's very small in size, so that would be for a child's casket. Another elaborate At Rest. An inset image of Jesus and some cherubs. So before the lid of the casket was closed, that would have been removed and given to the family. Many times they were made into memorial pieces that would have hung in the home. It was very common, it was very common to keep around reminders of the deceased. And one of the ways that you did that was perhaps taking pictures of the dead people, or the casket crucifixes and casket plates, and framing them and hanging them. This is for a child, a young boy that had died. Casket plate says Our Darling. Here's a very nice casket crucifix. And this is a very elaborate memorial piece that was done probably by the mother for her young child that died. It's a punched yarn, needlework, backing, and then the casket plate and the casket crucifix are attached to it. And this is on the table over there. Absolutely beautiful. And this would have hung in the parlor. Here's a close-up. Here's one with a father casket plate. These, I'm guessing, are from about 1900 to 1920, sometime in there. And they also did these pre-printed remembrance pictures. These were framed. There's one on the table over here. They would have been pre-printed with all of the graphic and a poem on them, and then at the very bottom would be printed at the time of death with the person's name and vital statistics. And we're supposed to do that one. This one is from Wausau, and this is for Mrs. Harry Close and her little baby. Anyone know what this is? This is a sick call set, and this was used by Catholics for giving the last rites. This is a very ornate set, probably was used by a priest who was traveling or in a church, a rural church, where they didn't have a large set. This really is too large and too ornate to have just been used in someone's home. When they gave the last rites before someone died, preferably it was the priest who did it for you. It does come with an instruction book though. So if there was no priest around, it advised the layperson on how to administer this sacrament. Lots of rules to it. And I have one book where it actually gives very out of the ordinary death circumstances or near-death circumstances and how you should address that when you are giving the last rites. And the one that always didn't make me laugh, but I mean, sometimes they just seem a little wacky. And one of the situations or scenarios was, if a building collapses, because you're always supposed to anoint their forehead. If a building collapses and all that is accessible is the person's foot, what do you do? and just for everyone's information, if that ever happens to you, anoint the part you can reach that is closest to the forehead. So that could be the ankle. And if you follow that rule, I guess you're all good. These are examples of some that would have been in people's homes. The ones that many of you are probably familiar with. When they're not set up like this, the lid of it slides on and just becomes a crucifix that you can hang on the wall. In the 1950s and 60s, these were very popular. A lot of funeral homes gave these to newly married couples. Happy wedding. Be prepared when you're supposed to.
Reminder, let's say until death do you part.
Just so you all don't think I'm a little wacky for collecting this stuff, they actually write books for people who collect post-mortem things. And it's on the table over there. Very interesting. I have only ever encountered, I think, 2 people who also collect pictures of dead people. And that takes us to the pictures of death, which is the core of my collection, post-mortem photos. It became very popular when photography became available to professional photographers. Before that, there were still post-mortem images that were created, but they would have been done as paintings, portraits, usually by wealthy families. But when photography became available to the masses through professional photographers, that was really when they started documenting many of the death scenes. And unfortunately, because photography was not available in everybody's house like it is now, you know, you've got a child who's a year old and you probably already have 1,000 pictures of them. Many times, you know, especially starting in the 1860s and into the turn of the century, a picture of your child or anyone else deceased may be the only picture that you have of them. So while to us it may seem like, why in the world would you, of all pictures you could have, would you want a picture of them dead? It very possibly was the only picture you'd have of them, and you would much rather have a picture of them dead than no picture at all. This is the earliest one in my collection. This is from the 1860s. And and this is very small, cartoon size. These early post-mortem photos really were taken close up of the person. Photography had not yet advanced to the point where you could really step back and take an entire room picture. You had to be somewhat close. So with some pictures, you can actually date them pretty easily by how far away the camera is from the body. So these you'll see they're close up. They're very, they're not really detailed and set up like some of the later pictures. They are lovely. Here you can see our Darlington on the outside. This one's set up in a home. And here's two more children. Well, consequently, I have a lot of pictures of dead babies, dead children. Now we're starting to get a little bit further away, starting to kind of capture the scene rather than just getting the image of the body. This is a baby laid out in a christening gown. And this one and the next picture are, I think, my two favorites. These are local. I don't know who the child is, but these were taken by Malenke Studio. This is a photo that was taken when the undertaker was just beginning what he was doing. The child is on the table, laid out. You can see there's some things around, something wrapped around the pole. So this is kind of the before scene, and what the undertaker turns this into is this beautiful scene, where the netting is down around the baby, there's flowers that have been placed, and this really kind of has taken it to a different level, something that's really to me is quite beautiful. Photographers loved to photograph the dead because they were the best subjects. They never moved. Especially in the early years when, to take a picture, you had to sit really still for a very long time. That would have been almost impossible with children, very hard even with adults. The dead people never moved. So consequently, you see photographers doing some fantastic things with setting the scene with these pictures. And here's another, we're stepping back here again, getting the whole scene. You can see the casket plate in the lid of the casket there. And as you'll see, the floral arrangements are just fantastic. This photo is on the table over here. Again, the nice kind of dirty velvety backdrop behind the casket. And you can get some fantastic interiors of homes. Yes, Gary?
Is there an age of when they wouldn't have taken a picture, like, was there an age so young that it was sort of off limits, or was everything?
Everything. I have several books that have pictures that people have collected, and there are newborn babies who are stillborn, who are in post-mortem photos.
Okay, thanks.
Mm-hmm. So you can get some good interiors. This actually, obviously, in-house, you see great furniture. Very ornate casket, the fabric in the casket. Tons of flowers. I'm wondering if this is in a funeral home, just because there's really nothing on the wall. Interesting thing to point out about this is this light right here. It was a very short-lived thing to put a light there to provide, to cast a glow on the deceased. And the only problem was that the light could get so hot that it could melt, like if you had master plastic, or you had to create features, or it would melt makeup. And it was also known to set the lining of the casket on fire. So it did not last very long. It really, talking about the transition of when you went from funerals being in the home to being in funeral parlors. It was in, I believe, the 1920s when the state of Wisconsin passed a law that if you wanted to embalm people, you had to do it in a separate building from your furniture business. Some undertakers just had one, they had a furniture store, and across the hall was where they embalmed people. Made a law that you had to have a separate building, which was when the furniture makers started doing totally separate businesses for their funeral line. And they called them funeral parlors to create kind of a warm connotation with having somebody laid out in their home and having somebody laid out in a commercial building. It was just meant to be kind of friendly and warm and comforting that instead of having the person laid out in the parlor of your home, you would have them laid out in the parlor at the funeral home. This is one of my favorites. Can you imagine? Can you imagine the smell that would have been in this room? An interesting coffin with like a fabric on the outside that's kind of textured. Now if you go to the funeral home and you want this kind of texture, it's the cheap casket. And another in-home, flowers all over the place. And you can see here, one of the arrangements has a clock in it that is set to, it looks like 10 o'clock. And clocks would have been set in the arrangements to the approximate time of death of the person. This is lovely Ruth Hohenheiser from Wausau. She was in her early 20s when she died. I believe she had tuberculosis. She has a casket plate inside the lid also. Her father was a furrier in town. Another one with that darn light movement. You can see it's turned on and there's like a reverse painted scene on it. A man. I have far more post-mortem photos of women than I do of men. I think I've got maybe 2 or 3 that show men. And I don't know what's up with that. Sometimes it's almost hard to see where the dead person is because there's so many flowers. And you can see, you know, some of the arrangements that you see in the funeral flower book, you see in these. And here, you can see at the top, this is a wheel, and part of it is missing. And the part that's missing would represent the loss of the deceased. It's the family wheel, and that person is missing. And what do you notice about this one that's not quite right?
She's on the other side.
That's right. The head's on the wrong side. It's always intrigued me. And I wonder, did somebody print it backwards? Was there something wrong with the other side of her face that they didn't want to put her the other way? You know, I really don't know. There's no words on anything that tell me if the picture's backwards or not. Because usually the head's the other way. This one is definitely in a funeral parlor. You can see that obviously the hominess is gone, the warmth of it is gone, but there are beautiful, some of the things that we see over here. The portable meter, there's portable lights, the portable crucifix. And I think she looks like Betty Davis. No casket plate, but she's got a crucifix. And I also think she looks like she's in a jammies. In addition to photographing the actual scene with the deceased in it, it was also very, very popular to photograph the flowers that were with the funeral. These would have been taken to the studio, recreated by the photographer. And you can see here, there's one with the casket plate in it. They've also incorporated a photo of the deceased when they were living. Sometimes these would have been sent to family members who couldn't come to the funeral. This one, the flowers are arranged around a portrait of the woman. Here's the casket closed with all the flowers. You can see the clock over in the left-hand corner, stopped at 2:10. The casket on the front porch. Some more beautiful arrangements. This one is fraught with symbolism. You can see the clock set to 10:45. There's a dove, which is usually symbolic of it being the funeral of a child. The wheel with the missing spoke. The horseshoe shaped thing, quarter. More very elaborate things. Photographing the flowers at the cemetery. Sometimes these were made into postcards and just mailed. I have post-mortem photos that are made into postcards. Can you imagine if you were the mailman? Caskets going into the ground. And lest we think we don't do this anymore, this is my mother. Mother died in 2013. I took my own post-mortem photos, capturing her up close and the scene at St. Michael's. While the practice of doing post-mortem photography with a professional photographer really stopped late 1930s, early 1940s, for the most part, people still continue to do it with their own cameras. People still do it now. It's very rarely talked about. Funeral directors that I know tell me that families, if they're going to do it, will do it beforehand. There's usually oftentimes some dissension in the family about people not wanting anybody to take pictures of them and other people wanting it done. So it's done. It's oftentimes done in secret. There's still a stigma about it. It really, while it was going on into the early 1940s, it really started to wane. The whole intense memorialization with all of these pictures and the cards and all of these things. Late 19-teens around the World War I time. And that really, I'm not quite sure why it happened. I don't know if anyone is. My personal theory is that it really started to be a time where death was becoming removed from the home. Hospitals were starting to be places that you were taken to get better, rather than where you were taken to die. Funeral homes, funeral parlors were starting, which was also getting death out of the home. Commercial cemeteries were all over the place, so a lot of people weren't burying their family members in the backyard anymore. And you really had a generation of people who were growing up with death not being part of life for them. So we really started to send people away when they were sick and dying, rather than taking care of them at home. And that really seems to be the point, at least to me, where we stopped doing these elaborate rituals surrounding death. Yes, Brian?
In my reading about the Spanish flu epidemic of 1918, they connect the flu epidemic with that phenomenon. Like you mentioned about the parlor, they said that's about the time they started calling it the living room instead of the parlor, as a way to kind of, let's just forget about that horrible epidemic and get on with life instead.
Right. And roughly how many people died of influenza during the epidemic, Brian? I know you noticed.
Millions.
Millions. Right. I think the country was overtaken by death. And I'm just going to quickly go through some things about the place of death, which is the cemetery, Pine Grove Cemetery, my favorite. This is a half of a stereopticon card from May 30th, 1884, at what's then called the Wausau Cemetery. And they are having a Memorial Day parade. This is the earliest picture I've ever seen that has anything to do with Pine Grove. Pine Grove Cemetery, the land for it was purchased in 1859. It was the fourth cemetery in Wausau. The bodies having been subsequently moved from cemetery to cemetery. The cemetery before this was at the corner of Grand and Thomas, and at that point there was some concern with the citizens and the city that the land was low-lying and that if there was a gully washer of rain, it would wash out the cemetery. So they purchased the land that started Pine Grove, which at that time was way out of town, and they really didn't think the city would ever grow to get that far. And they started doing burials there. They encouraged families of the people who had bodies buried in the other cemetery to bring them to the new cemetery. Some people did, a lot of people didn't. The feared gully washer came and it washed the remaining bodies out of that cemetery and down the river. And there is a monument at the front of Pine Grove to the right of the entrance arch that is a monument to those who were lost. This is the entrance arch. It was built in 1912, with funds raised by the Ladies Literary Society. They felt that it was very important for there to be a focal point for the entrance of the cemetery. And they also felt that it was important for people to have a resting place when they came to the cemetery. It was not uncommon for families every Sunday to come to the cemetery and have a picnic lunch on Grandma and Grandpa's grave. They, for the most part, did not consider the cemetery to be a scary place, a bad place, a morbid place. It was where you went to have a little family reunion. When they built the entrance arch, this wing of it, where the office is now, was the ladies' resting room. There were toilets in there, there was a fireplace, there was furniture that ladies who came to the cemetery could rest on. On the other side was the men's room, which had no heat in it, was just a toilet. This is the mausoleum, which is located at the back of Pine Grove Cemetery. This is owned by the Pine Grove Cemetery Mausoleum Association. Built in 1912 also. And most people have not been inside. This is what it looks like inside. It's absolutely beautiful. White marble with gray veining. Still has the original furniture inside. This is the chapel that I've never found anyone who knows anything about. It's been torn down. Absolutely lovely. Falling apart, but absolutely lovely. The chapel. And this is the repository that was across from the chapel. This is where they stored the bodies over the winter when they could not dig to bury them. And you see the numbered slots in the photo on the left with caskets in them. So in the spring, they would have a, dig the holes, empty the repository. Anderson Brothers and Johnson. And again, I said this is where the beautiful ruby red granite comes from. Their quarries were located at Granite Heights. When you're in any cemetery in Marathon County, almost all you see is the beautiful red stones. Even when you get down to maybe Madison or Milwaukee, you don't often see a lot of the red stones. I'm very lucky, I'm very happy that we were lucky enough to have them be here. It didn't cost a lot to transport it 10 miles down the road. So consequently, we have a lot of it. When you get to Chicago, Milwaukee, and Madison, it was the rich people who could afford to have it trucked. So you'll see some absolutely beautiful, huge monuments in those cemeteries that are made out of Marathon County red granite. This is a view down into the original quarry. And some of the workers. Quarry is ruby red. And they would shuttle blocks of granite across the Wisconsin River between the quarry and their plant. And then in the winter, when the ice was on the river, they would take it over by horse and sleigh. This is the W.W. Walker Monumental Works, which is where Wausau Monument is on Bright Avenue across from Pine Grove Cemetery. They have a lot of blanks out front. They would really put anything you wanted on a stone, but many times, especially in rural areas, the style of your stone really depended on what the monument dealer liked. You didn't have a lot of options, so it looks like here they have a lot. We've got tons of different symbolism and different styles of stone in Pine Grove. And that's just a stone carver, not local, just so you can see what it looks like. Wausau had probably a dozen stone carvers at the height of hand carving. Or if you wanted to, you could buy your headstone from the Sears catalog. This one is $5. The tall one looks like it's about $15. And in etiquette and readiness, they would give you samples of what you could put on your stone. And as far as the wording and punctuation, the lesson taught in these examples is that the more concise the inscription, the more favorably coming generations will judge of the handful of dust that lies beneath the leaning tombstone. And as with all things Victorian, it was symbolism. They wanted something else to represent about just about everything that was happening. And that also happened in the cemetery. The general thought with Victorians was the more elaborate something was, the bigger it was, the more detailed, the better it was, and the more rich it showed that you really were. You can see the open book here on this headstone. This is referred to as the Book of Life. Sometimes it will be open, as this one is, and there is some writing on this one which is indistinguishable at this point. Sometimes it will be open, roughly the number of pages that would indicate about how far through that person's life they had gotten. So if it was a child, there would be maybe a few pages turned. If it was a very old person, it might be turned almost all the way. A lot of times it's closed. There are also hands galore in the cemetery. This one is coming down from heaven and it's holding the chain. The chain represents the family, and you can see that the last link is broken, indicating that the family has been broken by the death of this person. This one has some beautiful drapery that's carved into it, and that was intended to be a remembrance of home for the deceased. The finger pointing up, which I always assumed was the way you wished you would go. Clasped hands, which oftentimes is the hand of God coming for the deceased. This is an anchor, which often symbolizes that the soul is anchored in heaven. And of course, with our wonderful logging history here, there are a lot of logs and trees fashioned in different ways. This is William Callan with a lovely and I'm sure very difficult to carve representation of a log. And the tree of life shows up so often in this area. This is a very nice one. This is a family monument. So this would have the family name on it, and then each of the individual members of the family who were buried there would have their own headstone. So this is a beautifully carved tree. There are some ferns at the bottom, and a scroll on the front of the family name. And you'll notice the scroll is held up by a piece of rope, and there's a chunk of it missing. And this is, again, an indication that something is missing from the family. And small stature trees for children who have died. This one has a cherub carved into it. A very short stump with a dead dove at the bottom. One of my favorites, we affectionately call this the bathtub. There's a whole set of them right when you walk in the front gate of Pine Grove. I'm sure originally it was meant as a flower bed. An obelisk, which has some nice drapery on it, Masonic symbolism. An urn, which is symbolic of the remains of the person being beneath them, and there's some drapery on the top of that also. This is a double headstone for a family that lost 2 children. A triple for the Bardell family who lost 3 children. And this is a line of 4 children in the family who had died that vandals attacked. I'm assuming these have been fixed. Patty would not let it go. It worked. This is another one for a child. It's an angel with a lamb. And really from World War I up to maybe the 70s or the 80s, you didn't see a lot of symbolism in headstones. You were lucky if you got the full name of the person and when they were born and died. It's starting to come around. Symbolism has appeared in the cemetery again. People are putting things on their headstones to personalize them, just like they're personalizing funerals. This is a very nice one with the personalized pictures on it. And I've seen a number of Hmong headstones that have that. It was also popular in cemeteries that had a lot of Polish people buried in them. Like this one. This is from St. Michael's Cemetery. One of my favorites, I think Cliff died recently. He was still alive when I took the picture. This tells you a lot about Cliff. Securely tied off and finished with engines. And this woman has flamingos on her headstone, and for the longest time there were pink flamingos that would be planted in the ground next to it. And this was not a do-it-yourself, a handmade one. It was just a piece of wood that had some carving on it. There was a piece of leather attached to it that had the name and the birth and death dates, and then a piece of cardboard that was thumbtacked onto it that had a poem written on it. Last time I looked, this has not been there for years. I'm sure it deteriorated very quickly. And of course, there's the above ground. Family mausoleums. There are a number of these in Pine Grove. And that's the window that's inside that mausoleum. Don't be afraid to go up to the door and look in on a sunny day, and you'll see beautiful windows in most of them. This is the D.C. Everest Mausoleum, which is always manicured. And that's the window that's inside that mausoleum. And that brings us to the end. Just about. Any questions? Anyone? Yes?
I always was told once that they had the elaborate flowers before it was embalming, so that the smell of the flowers was supposed to cover up the smell of the decaying body.
And that may have played a part in it. A lot of embalming was very popular. Embalming started during Civil War, and really the process has not changed all that much. I'm sure there were some people who chose not to embalm, or if there was not a funeral director or an undertaker, that they just couldn't embalm. So in those cases, that's very possible. But embalming was the thing to do. Yes?
I have a question about the items that you used here. We were in an antique store just recently, and we saw a wreath, approximately this size, and it was supposed to be hand. Would that have been connected to this, or were these items basically smaller?
It's been my experience that the ones that truly are mourning pieces are smaller. They were meant to be close to you. To create something like that, you would have had to have taken a lot of hair off a dead person. And a lot of people mistakenly think that all hair wreaths are memorial pieces, and it's most likely not the case. Anyone else? Yes.
You were talking about, that change when they stopped having the funerals at home and they moved to the funeral homes and things went quite as family oriented. My mother, who's 91, remembers going to funerals many years ago where there was a lot of crying and alcohol. People weren't afraid to show that. And nowadays, she says, people don't cry like they used to at funerals. Is that possibly connected to that? More of a focus on the celebration of the person's life? I just wonder what your comment on that.
What her comment is that her mother, who was 92,
91.
91, remembers funerals where there was a lot of outpouring of emotion, and kind of wondering why that's not happening so much anymore, and is it, are we dealing with it differently, really? My personal opinion, which is really all I can speak for, there really was a whole generation of people who kind of stopped being able to work through the process of death like their parents used to. When you started sending people away to die, sending them to nursing homes, sending them to hospitals, kids didn't grow up knowing people are born, people die. And they subsequently had children and tried to shield their children from those things. So you really, especially me, I was not encouraged to go to funerals. If somebody died, my parents would never have taken me. Absolutely would not, just because it would just not be a good thing for me to know. Why should I have to know about dead people? We really have kind of turned it now where people are more accepting of death. We really are memorializing and remembering and celebrating life more. Now you have personalized funerals. People, if somebody was an avid fisherman, all of their fishing things will be there, and you really are going to celebrate the life of that person, to celebrate the passions of that person, and not necessarily to let your own emotion out. So, is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? I don't know. We certainly treat death differently now than they used to, but I think better than they did 50 years ago.
Well, my great grandmother died in 1954. I was 6 years old. I was not, they didn't take me to the funeral. We went to a babysitter,
Yeah.
which I regret not being there because I think I would have remembered that.
And someone once told me a story, I don't know who it was. Was it someone in your family where as a child they were forced to kiss their grandparent in the casket? Maybe it wasn't. Like screw them up for life. They didn't know what was going on, and the whole they were picked up and said, "Grandpa's dead, kiss him goodbye." And Grandpa was not warm, and they didn't know what was going on, and nobody explained anything, and it was just torture. Any other questions? Oh, yes.
We might have missed it since we showed up late, but I was curious when and why they stopped doing funerals in the home and sending to a funeral home.
Well, a large part of the West funeral homes started, and it was a place that was touted as, call us, we'll take care of everything. You didn't have to do anything anymore. It was also at about that time that people started sending, if you were sick, you got sent away to a hospital. If you were old, you got sent away to a home for the old aged. If you died, you got sent to a cemetery and you weren't buried out back.